What's up, HSM? Hope you're having a great week. So glad you've made it to your small group. Let's dive in and see what Paul has to say for us in our next study of Ephesians here. We're going to be starting in chapter 5 this week. And I'd like to start out by asking you the question, have you ever been accused of being a hypocrite? Or maybe have you ever thought that somebody else was being hypocritical? I want us to think about what that word means, because a lot of times we tend to think that being a hypocrite is essentially not practicing what you preach. And while that's technically true, more or less, it's not really what being a hypocrite really means. That's the result of being a hypocrite, not what a hypocrite is. Hypocrisy is not just practicing what you preach, it's not believing in what you preach. And that's why you don't practice it. That's why your behavior changes based on what you believe. Now, this is a temptation for all of us. We all flirt with the temptation to be hypocritical sometimes, because especially as Christians, we'll find ourselves in a social situation where we feel like we should act a way that maybe isn't what the Bible tells us to act. And in those moments, we have a choice to make. And we have to choose what we believe is the most important thing for us to do in that moment. Do we believe we need to honor God and live our lives His way? Or do we believe that we need to live according to the social norms of whatever that moment might be with whatever individuals we may be around? Well, that problem wasn't just unique to you and I. That problem was also unique to the Ephesian church as Paul was writing to them, because they were struggling with the culture that they lived in, and they were wondering, how should I act around these certain types of things and people and situations? And so he wants to write them and to remind them that the gospel that they believe in needs to be lived out in their everyday circumstances, no matter their social context. So in the beginning of chapter 5, Paul says this in verse 1, "Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God." And then he goes through the rest of this first section in chapter 5, giving us really practical examples of what it looks like to be an imitator of God and walk in love as Christ has loved us. And he gives us two lists, basically a list of do's and a list of don'ts. But they're not like, hey, you need to do this so that you can become something. They're lists of things that describe things that they already are. Because if you'll look in verse 3, Paul calls the Ephesians saints. Conduct that is proper for saints to have. So what Paul is going to give us in these two lists aren't boxes to check so that I become something that I wish that I was. But instead, Paul is going to give these behaviors to help us understand what behavior is consistent with following Jesus. Because the Christian life really is a struggle of making sure that our identity as Christ followers matches what we do, our activity, our behavior. And so much of where we find ourselves in any context gives us choices where we have to make all the time. Am I going to act consistently with who I am as a Christian, as a saint, or am I going to act like the world around me? The same was true for the Ephesians, just like it's true for us right now. And I think that you'll find our study today is going to give us some really practical ways to live that out, that aren't just about working harder at being better people, but remembering who we are, and that who we are determines how we live our lives. Our identity shows us how to live with our activity. That's the focus of our study today, and I hope you enjoy diving into Ephesians 5.